It is an honor, a great honor, to be asked to be here this evening, especially since it is the first one and maybe the last one after I'm done. I'm not an expert in any way on the mushroom industry. Mr. Alonzo is the person that's going to give you that great information and tell you what's happening today in a really exciting field. I represent the old days. When the industry was made up solely of small family farms, little tiny places that dotted this whole area that were started essentially by immigrants. So this is just one family story of how we got into the mushroom industry, the Carrazzo family here in Avondale. Basically, the story goes history-wise that around 1855, William Swain, successful florist in the area, I believe carnations, really wanted to try to figure out to do something to utilize the empty space that was under the trays, the tables where he was growing the flowers. And so he looked into the possibility of this new technology of growing mushrooms. So he sent for spawn from England, experimented with it, and it did not take off right away, but it did putter along for years and years. Meanwhile, down the road from here in Wilmington, the DuPont family had their gunpowder mills, which is now the Hagley area. It was extremely, as you can imagine, dangerous work. And so it attracted people that were basically pretty desperate. So we had essentially immigrants coming in to do this job. Someone from the village my family is from in northern Italy called Gisvala decided to take a job there. And much like immigrants have done forever, once he got a job and there were other openings, they sent for more family. And because they couldn't speak the language, they took these really high-risk jobs because there was pay in it. There was the ability to work alongside of your friends and relatives. And so it was less scary, obviously, to do it. However, it was not easy. They lived in a little village, which actually doesn't exist anymore, called Squirrel Run, which was right there on the Brandywine. And in fact, here's a photograph taken there at Squirrel Run. These are my family right here. The basic way that things worked was that there were 16 homes there, but within each home, the person that first rented it would take the downstairs, and then they would rent and sub-rent the upstairs and then the attic. And so we have some of these documents that are from that time showing when census were taken, and different relatives and friends of our family that lived in our particular house. So in each one of these houses, there'd be at least 3 families, maybe more, all of them working at DuPont in the gunpowder mills there. Speaking of which, they were having a bit of problems with people blowing up, unfortunately, which is part of that whole ball of wax working in that industry, unfortunately. So they hired some folks like my great-grandfather to build these special shacks because he was a stonemason out of stone, and the walls were about 3 foot thick, and they were walled stone on 3 sides with a door in the front. The door faced the river. And the whole engineering behind this was, if you were working with the gunpowder and you blew up, you and the materials you were working with did not take out other buildings. And so what would happen is that the door in the front was wood, and you would be blown out over the Brandywine. And back in the day, our family called that crossing the river. So when someone met that fate, that was called crossing the river. He also was there. Coincidentally, my family was there during the pandemic, the last pandemic, the Spanish flu in 1918. And that was a really crazy time there. Many people passed away, and it was just horrendous. Given all that, they decided at that time, the DuPont family decided to start to get out of and divest out of the armament industry, especially here first. So essentially overnight, they threw everyone out and demolished that little village of Squirrel Run. And so what you had were all of these people now out on the street who had come to this country and at great risk, and now they had nothing, no jobs, no homes, nothing. The very ironic thing is that our family from this little village of 400 people had one source of income in Italy, and that was they were master mushroom foragers. And so at this time, they heard about this new technology, which was in their minds just an impossible dream, that the mushroom had finally really been domesticated, and they were doing it right up the road in this area of Kennett, Tuff, and Avondale. And so they came here and were all over joining this industry. And so this group of Italians came, and they became some of the first laborers here to work in the mushroom industry. Right around the same time, once again, another perfect storm, there were two marble quarries here in Avondale, and they both were using Italian immigrants to hand cut the marble, which is a very, really difficult and skilled task, but it's extremely dangerous also. Well, in both cases, during the quarrying, they hit water. And in fact, in one case, the water came up so fast that they lost the mules, that they couldn't even get them out of there in time. So then you had this other group of Italians in the area who were suddenly out of work. And so they became part of the mushroom industry. So you had this kind of jobless group of very motivated immigrants who were extremely excited by this mushroom industry, and they got into it and made it kind of blossom overnight. By the 20s, the Italians started to save their money from this industry and build their own mushroom houses. And what they did that was a little bit different was they only, in most cases, could afford little parcels, maybe 2 acres, 4 acres, whatever it was. If they had a half an acre, they put mushroom houses on it. And back in the day when I was a kid, you could still see this around here, where literally every little house had in the backyard, a double. And when I say double, doubles are, if you can picture a greenhouse, they look just like a greenhouse made out of cinder block. And that goes back to William Swain. Our family bought into this farm where we're at right now in the 1920s to get in the mushroom business. In fact, this is our farm here, and there's our mushroom houses right there. We had 5 doubles. And our family dabbled in this industry for about 70 years. This was the label that we had for our mushrooms. And it was really primitive stuff, nothing like what Chris is doing today. I don't even know if Chris can still remember some of the stuff that we did back in the day, because by the time we got out of it, most of that stuff had been, stopped. But it was seasonal back then. First of all, you couldn't do it in the hot weather. You worked, typically you started at 3:30 in the morning, and you went very early because that was just the way it was done. There were issues with temperature, there were issues with the workday. It just was a very interesting thing. Back then it was a closed system. So what we did here was we grew hay in our field, and I keep pointing to the field over there. We would then take our animals' manure and mix it with that hay on the wharf. And then we would, with a 1937 Ford tractor, by the way, that was the last tractor we had here, which I learned how to operate. Then take the substrate, you would take this and you would mix it, put it into the houses, into the trays, into the beds where you grow the mushrooms, which was a miserable, terrible, tough job. And then you would mix it with the spawn, and then you would go home and basically pray. And if you were very, very lucky, you had mushrooms coming up. Then what you did was after you harvested, you took the spent compost out because you can't reuse it, and then the stumps And then we would spread those back on the field. And then we would grow the hay from there again. And so it was this closed system that you saw on many of the farms here. And this was before the industry, really became a big thing. Sometimes you did all of that work and you had nothing. You had fly issues, or you had a temperature issue, or someone left a door open, or someone didn't close a door at the right time or the wrong time. And it was devastating because it was a heck of a lot of work. And when you had nothing, cleaning out those beds when you got no money in for having done all that work was just a real butt kicker. But the other thing that was kind of interesting was back then, mushrooms were still exotic in America. So we had to grow them. And I remember this, they had to be less than a 50-cent piece because for the American palate, they didn't want them to have too much flavor back then. So if you did not get them harvested in time before they got to that size, they would end up having to be sent down to the cannery and then chopped for soup or whatever purpose they use them for. And it was a loss of money to do that. So you did everything possible to get the fresh price. The interesting thing is families at that time were still picking. Like my family, we picked. We did the labor in these small farms. We wore little miners' hats, and we had these houses that had the cypress boards, and you walked around, and on the second floor there was about 18 inches wide, and invariably one time in your life you would miss that board and go down to the first floor and land on the concrete. You do that one time and then you learn your lesson. It was a lot of work, a lot of risk, but it was funny. They were very happy, and they did quite well as far as being for a family farm. And those groups of the small farms at that time did beautifully, really, for a long time. The labor, as we became more successful, we built more houses, and our little families could not keep up with the work anymore. So we started to bring in outside labor. And at first that was originally other Italian families, and then it became African Americans from Avondale, later Puerto Rican, Mexican, and now we have people from South America and Asia and all different resources. Guatemala is one recently. Chris can speak to that more than I can. But eventually, in our case, we bowed out of the industry because of a few things that happened kind of at the same time, another kind of perfect storm. There was a botulism scare that, believe it or not, was ignited by an episode of All in the Family. You may recall the Cling Peaches episode. There was the U.S. market got flooded at one point from overseas mushrooms. I think it was Formosa, but I'm not positive on that. The profit started to move into an age when the mom and pops could no longer survive. And then the final blow for groups like us and our family was not having anyone to take it over. So the ascension was a problem. We finally got to a point where it was only my elderly uncle and his sisters running the place, and they just couldn't handle it anymore. And I was the only child, one of two children in the family, and neither of us were mushroom. We just didn't want to continue in the industry there. So eventually, I did end up returning here, and we ended up planting a vineyard and to keep this farm alive, because we were, my family just has been here for a very long time, and we loved it. And in fact, we're coming up on our 100-year centennial here in a few years, so we're very proud of that. So anyway, I will turn this over to a person who can tell you much better information, Mr. Chris Alonzo. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Alonzo. I'm a third generation mushroom farmer. And while Anthony was talking, and thank you, Anthony, that's great. I learned actually so much from you. There's so much history that we all don't even realize happened to get us to the point that we are today. And why is Chester County the mushroom capital of the world? So one of the things I did while you were talking, Anthony, is I actually put up a picture of our family farm, the Alonzo family farm. So as you were describing, a typical farm was about this size. This is 4 growing rooms and a dirt shed. And the family house was in the front there with a barn. And this was very typical for a family to operate because they could do it with the family members and maybe just 3 or 4 or 5 employees. And what the great thing about the farms is they were all so close to each other. In the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, there were approximately 450 small family farms made up of Quakers and Italians. And they didn't operate completely independently because they all helped each other. They all supported each other. If somebody's tractor was broken, they borrowed someone else's. If someone had a busy day, they would help each other this week, and the next week they would go back and help the other family the following week. Um, so I want to give you a little bit of how my family became mushroom farmers. And hopefully the screen in the back isn't distracting. I'll try to keep still uh, as I'm talking. So my story and how I became a mushroom farmer is very typical. And so my history and my family's history should be a good example of how it happened that uh, there were so many mushroom farmers in Chester County, and why today we grow 450 million pounds of mushrooms a year, and that there's a $3 billion impact to the local economy. But it didn't start out that way. So my grandfather came over to the country in the early 1900s, and that was, of course, leaving Italy in poverty and not a great life in Italy. And they came over, in just after the turn of the century to make a better living. So my grandfather did not graduate high school. He went straight to work in the silk mills in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And he worked in the silk mills for a while, and then the mill got shut down, and he needed to find work. Uh, my great grandfather, when he came over, was a stonemason, and Anthony already spoke to that. Is that his ancestry was stonemasons. This was very typical of the Italians coming over. They knew how to work stone. They knew how to work with their hands. They knew how to do heavy labor. So it was natural for them to work in the quarries, and there were a lot of stone quarries in the area. Avondale had a quarry. There were quarries all within 20, 30 miles of here. So that's one of the reasons there were so many Italian families to begin with. So after the silk mill shut down, my great grandfather, Alfonso Alonzo, asked the Frezzo family, Emilio Frezzo, to help us out because my great grandfather had done a favor to his family. And so he basically said, "Hey, I helped you out. Can you help my son out? He needs a job. Can you teach him how to grow mushrooms?" The Frezzo family was already down here in Avondale growing mushrooms. So in 1938, my grandfather, at 22 years old, came down to Avondale and lived on the farm, and he started to learn how to grow mushrooms. And he became business partners with the Frezzo family for 4 years. But as things turn out, the Frezzo family had a lot of boys in their family, and they wanted to go into the family business. So my grandfather went off on his own. So in 1943, he went and built his own mushroom farm. And that's what you see in the picture behind me is 4 growing rooms, 4 doubles. Okay, so you'll hear this term, a double. What is a mushroom farm that's called a double or 4 doubles? Well, years ago, they actually built the farms that are about 20 feet wide with one door, one entranceway, and that was a single growing room. But then later they wanted the rooms to be bigger, so they knocked down the center wall and they made 2 rooms to be a single room. And now they call it a double. So if you hear someone say, oh, I have 3 doubles or 5 doubles, that's how the term came to be. Very technical. So after my grandfather started the farm, 4 rooms, you only grew 2 crops a year. You grew 1 crop in the fall because you needed the colder weather, and you grew 1 crop in the spring. And you prepared the soil all summer long. You gathered raw materials to make compost. And every mushroom farm made compost at their home farm. So you had 450 farms all making compost, all doing the whole process themselves and only using family members and a few employees. So you fast forward through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and at this time, everybody was just learning, by their own trial and errors. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. And this is when Penn State University came in, and they started an actual mushroom program. There were 6 professors up there who worked with mushrooms, worked on learning compost, worked on soils that mushrooms would fruit in. And every spring, the mushroom growers would go up for this huge conference called a short course, and they would all learn from the scientists and from each other. Because back then in the summer, that was the time that you prepared things. You weren't actually farming. And so they all learned, what the others had done with trial and error through the years. And then Penn State actually put science behind it. So back then, a good crop in a room was about 10,000 pounds of mushrooms was a really good crop. And today, a good crop for me would be 80,000 pounds in a growing room. So very different standards. So then fast forward to 1966, 1967, and my grandfather's getting a little older and didn't know how to do the advancements, wasn't getting the yields that he wanted. So, of course, my grandmother, in typical fashion, called up her son, Peter Alonzo, and said, hey, Peter, come home, come help your father grow mushrooms. My father was the first person to graduate from university. He graduated from LaSalle University, was working for DuPont, and was thinking, I'm never going to grow mushrooms. Now, he's not the first person to say it, and he'll not be the last one. Farming is not easy. So anyway, 1967, he came home, helped my grandfather, and he had a banner crop. He just did really well, and he was hooked. He loved the independence of being a farmer. He loved that he was in control of his success, and he loved the people. The people were the family that he grew up with. And so my father quit his job at DuPont, worked with the family farm, and took it over immediately. But it was at this time that the consumer was mostly eating canned mushrooms, but the market was starting to go to the fresh market. So growing just 4 rooms a year meant that you were inconsistent in the daily amount of mushrooms. Some days you had a lot, some days you had none. So in the 1970s, my father bought Louis Levisa's mushroom farm, who wanted to retire, and then he employed Louis Levisa for the next 20 years. And he bought the Fury family farm, and he expanded through accumulating other families' businesses. And even in 1980, he partnered with my uncle to create another farm. So they expanded, but did it jointly with each other. And that's why there used to be 450 farms, and today there's about 60 farms in Chester County. There's actually more mushroom houses, more mushrooms grown. There's just less families. And that was all driven because the consumer said, I don't want mushrooms every once in a while. I want them every day of the week. I want them fresh at the grocery store every single day. So as an industry, we had to react to the consumer, because mushroom growing would be easy if the consumer wasn't so demanding on promptness and quality and color and you know, all the perfect size mushrooms. And Anthony even mentioned the mushrooms couldn't be bigger than a 50-cent piece. So we actually have, to this day, we call the mushrooms that are slightly bigger than that silver dollars, because it's the size of a silver dollar or a little bit bigger. So the old terms are still being used today. So what we have is that my father was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was a farmer. He worked with his hands. He did all the heavy lifting. But my father said, I'm going to expand the business. I'm going to meet the market demand. I'm going to be innovative. So if you think about it, it went from 450 farms down to about 100 in a very short amount of time, about 20 years. And those were the people that reacted, that were innovative, that saw what needed to change in our industry. And so then if you also see our farm here, my father, being the entrepreneur, said, I want to put more mushroom houses here. But he wasn't allowed to. It was zoned commercial. So he was told that he was not allowed to expand the farm here. And if he wanted to do anything, he'd have to build mushroom houses somewhere else. So that's what he did. He said, okay, I'm going to sell this land and I'm going to build mushroom houses somewhere else. And so today, this is the site of the Walmart in Kennett Square. But that's what we did, is we went and we built mushroom houses somewhere else. And so what we did is we put more mushroom houses in one place to be more efficient, because obviously it's not easy to run a business, and you have costs, you have you know, more labor, you have more infrastructure. So we had to be smart about what we did. So, and that's the time when my father said to me, okay, Chris, are you going to be in the family business? And to his credit, he did not push me. He said, okay, Chris, if you want to be in the family business, no problem, you can come in. But if you want to go do something else, that's fine too. So that's what I did, is I went off to college and I said, there is no way I will ever be a mushroom grower. Oh my God, 7 days a week, getting up at early. We still work at 4 in the morning harvesting the mushrooms. So I went through all of high school, all of college, and even after college saying, nope, not going into mushrooms. So at a weak moment where I hated my job, I came home and I tried the business, and I fell in love with growing mushrooms, with being an entrepreneur. I didn't like the family business part. That part's really hard. But the growing of mushrooms, the creating something that people eat and it's healthy, that's really a driver. That's something that I get excited about. So in 2001, we built 16 mushroom houses when the 4 behind you got knocked down. And then in 2008, I took a big leap. I built a larger facility that is made of aluminum shelving on the inside. And what that did for us is it created efficiencies. So we not only had more mushroom houses in one location, but we also had energy efficiency because the aluminum shelving saved us money. We had mechanization where we could take out the hardest physical labor of growing mushrooms and make it where it was better to, you know, to do the work. So you can see behind me now, the aluminum shelving and me, of course, holding mushrooms. So this aluminum shelving is an advancement because it's a technology from Europe. It costs more money to build, but in the long run, it's safer for our employees. It creates better quality mushrooms and more energy efficient. So without us being innovative in the mushroom industry, then we become obsolete. We can't operate anymore. So the 60 farms that are still around today are the innovators. They're the ones that hear what the customer wants. We react. We create the opportunities with different size packaging. We create the opportunities with bringing in different workforces. My entire day is speaking Spanish. all my workers are from Mexico or Guatemala or other places, and they're the hardest working people, the best people. But our day is made up of speaking Spanish. And that's just how our industry's evolved. So what I've learned with all of this is that, first of all, my grandfather was a farmer. My dad's an entrepreneur, and I'm running a business. We have 150 employees. We grow 20 million pounds of mushrooms a year. We grow portobellos and white mushrooms. And I am a partner with all my peers in the mushroom industry. We need each other. We need to have a safe work environment for our employees. We need to be talking about the regulations. Under COVID right now, we had to do so many things because we were essential workers. So we were the first to implement all the temperature checks. We were the first to do the hand washing and social distancing. We were the leaders in the industry to be able to continue to operate. And our industry donated about about 5 million pounds of mushrooms in the month of March because the consumers couldn't purchase them. They were going to rot. So we were able to get them to the food banks and get them to the people that needed them. But our industry survived. And so we are nimble, we are quick to react. But that all came from this hard work ethic. And what's great about Chester County and its infrastructure is that all the agricultural entities work together. So you have horses locally. So we take the horse manure from the horse races, from the riding rings. We take all that horse manure in and we blend it with hay and straw, and we make a great compost that grows mushrooms. And then our byproduct, spent compost, goes back out to the cornfields. It increases the yield of the corn crop, or it goes as potting soil, or it goes as green roof. So these are the innovations where we're trying to make sure that not only our product, mushrooms, go to the consumer, but we're making sure that our byproducts are environmentally friendly and that we're utilizing everything we can. So agriculture is not easy, but it's rewarding. So I guess Anthony's spoken and I would like to leave it up that if there's questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I'm really honored to be able to have spoken today to everyone. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Chris. We do have a couple of questions. Chris, I'm going to stick with you for 1 second. The first question to you is sort of a personal one. Do you see your family continuing in the mushroom business?
That's a really good question. I see that the younger people today are not going to wear the 10 hats that I wear, that Anthony wears, even with his vineyard. I don't see the dynamics of that because our companies are bigger. I do see that our kids getting involved in marketing or sales or digital marketing or electrician, something to support the farm, but you need a diverse management team to operate a business like today. So I see the kids staying involved only if there's a specialty that will keep them interested. But very few of the kids are sticking with the, hey, I'm gonna take over the family business and I'm gonna be in charge. That's a challenge not only for mushrooms, but all of agriculture right now.
Anthony, this question is to you. How would a family recover? Actually, I guess it could be really for both of you. Chris, if you know this with your grandfather, how would a family recover if the mushrooms didn't grow? Did they plant backup crops?
Well, back then, my family they grew so much food that they had to rent a walk-in freezer in Avondale when they built it in the 30s, because they were always in fear that a depression would happen again. And so for them, this would happen, and they were okay. So not everyone was, but in our particular case, they were okay.
So my grandfather grew 8 crops a year, and I grow 8 crops every 10 days. So it's a little bit different, but today you're going to have bad crops. You're going to have crops that pick 10, 20, 30% less. You just have to, focus and try to make the next 10 crops cover that difference. And so really it's running a business. You have to train your people well, and you have to have good cash flow, and you have to meet the consumer's needs. And if somebody wakes up late or doesn't pay attention, then you're gonna really struggle. But if somebody's on top of it and talking to their neighbors, you're gonna figure it out. You're gonna have to figure it out. So there's no like backup plan because the margins are too thin. It's more just dig your heels in and dig your way out of the hole, and that makes you better. I hate the times that you get really run through the ringer, but generally you learn something and your farm becomes better because of it.
Okay. Anthony, this question is for you. How did you transition from a mushroom family into starting the winery?
My grandmother was still alive when we started this, and she passed away when she was 98. But I'll never forget the one thing she said to me when she saw us doing this vineyard and winery. She pulled me aside one day. She said, you chose the only thing harder than mushrooms. And so she might have been right about that. But I don't really feel that. I will say this. I will say that the mushroom industry taught me that you really just have to work every day if you want it to work. That's just it. That just was the way that I saw my family living. And I saw that there was no other option. So whatever I did, that instilled in me that you're just going to have to work 365 if you want it to work. And that's just the way it is. And you keep your head down and maybe something good will happen. But if you don't do that, it's probably not going to work. So that the transition part was mostly easy because the industry for us had kind of passed us by, and the Chris Alonzos of the world were, now taking it to another level, and we weren't prepared to go to that level. And so the timing was right for us.
Chris, this question is for you. You mentioned before when you built the new facility that you were using aluminum. What did you use before?
So mushroom houses are made out of cinder block walls and wooden uprights that go all the way to the roof and hold up the roof. And the concept of the farm is that you have a good environment to grow the mushrooms, but it's also designed so that you can harvest the mushrooms by hand. So, and to this day, every single mushroom grown the old way or the new way is still hand harvested, because the dexterity of people's hands can separate the mushrooms by size and by quality. We're sorting, small, medium, and large mushrooms. We're sorting if there's blemishes on the mushrooms. So everything's hand harvested. Of course, good food safety and all that. But the aluminum shelving allows the employees to do it in a safer way. They're on elevators that they can put themselves at a height that they're comfortable at. So it doesn't matter if you're 5 feet tall or 6 feet tall, you can be comfortable in your work environment. So it's just given us a little bit of an edge to attract workers to our industry. That's still a struggle today, having enough of the workforce.
This I'm going to read. Chris, tell them about how Dad, Aunt D, and A, Teresa, used to put the blue tissue into the wood boxes on Saturdays when they were little.
All right. So, and this is not just my family. This is every family in the mushroom industry. So the whole family had to participate. So in the mornings before kids would go to school and in the afternoons when they came home, they had to work on the mushroom farm. And it didn't matter whether you were 7 years old or 17. So my aunts, when they were, young girls, had to go to the farm, and they took the blue paper in the little 3-pound baskets, and you put the blue paper on either side. And after the mushrooms were there, you folded it in, put the lid, you stamped the lid with special or whatever kind of mushroom it was. So everybody worked, and I think they got paid 1 penny for every basket that they papered and labeled. So, but it was an obligation. It wasn't like, oh, I don't feel like working. It was, no, you were absolutely working.
Okay, I think this is probably for both of you. What's your favorite way to eat mushrooms today? A classic chicken marsala, portobello's grilled, or some other way?
Go ahead, Anthony.
All right. Shiitake, oyster, extra virgin olive oil, wild garlic chives, salt and pepper. That's it. I'm a purist in that sense.
So I have 2 favorites. First of all, when my mom cooked, she always sauteed mushrooms in white wine, and she added them to whatever we're eating, veal or chicken or steak, whatever we're eating, we always had sauteed mushrooms. And it was simple, just salt, pepper, olive oil and white wine. But the other way is I really love the portobellos. So you can take almost any kind of marinate the portobellos for about 15 minutes. And then you put them on the grill, gills down first for 3 to 4 minutes, and then gills up. And then the juices will stay in there. And then you top it with whatever you want. You can do marinara sauce and cheese. You can do any kind of anything in top of that. And it becomes a meal in itself. So that's actually what's going on recently is the consumer is getting a little bit more adventurous and trying different things. So I love grilled portobellos. But I also, as Anthony said, standard, traditional, just sauteed mushrooms is great.